So there's something I wanted to talk about today, and this is a point that I've covered in several other videos, but only in a brief kind of way. But it appears to me that most people don't get this very important point, and it is an important point. And so I want to cover it in a little bit more detail. And that's this idea that it is quite harmful to convince oneself that one has a very high level of view when that view itself is contrary to one's natural and uncontrived outlook in the world. Now, I'm going to have to give you an example here. We hear Westerners say things like, everyone is Buddha. There is no good and bad. All religions are the same. Now, the point here isn't that these are false statements. The point here is that we don't understand what these statements are saying. We don't understand what this means. And the reason why we don't understand the kind of basic or essential meaning of these very high views is because we're uneducated. We've never studied. So we hear a trite statement, everybody is Buddha, and then what we do is we kind of selectively interpret that in a way that it's more in harmony with our own natural worldview. So we look for things that are in harmony with our own way of seeing things. We don't look to kind of change our view or improve our view. We just look for things that seem to reinforce our own opinions on a matter. Now, this is really dangerous in the Dharma, in the spiritual path. So what it's taught is that we are ordinary beings. We're not noble beings, right? And it's through the practices of yoga and meditation that we kind of progress and we gain some kind of realization, or we have a chance of attaining some sort of spiritual level of accomplishment. So what we hear is, everything is equality. Everyone is Buddha. Everyone is equal. And it kind of resonates with our own kind of mundane 21st century ideas. For example, gender equality, non-discrimination, these sort of things. Well, that's not what was being talked about. When the Buddha taught about the equality of all phenomena, it wasn't a kind of mundane concept involving gender equality. That's something completely different. So the first thing to do is to look where these statements come from. And this teaching on the Buddha nature, that all beings are in essence Buddhas, comes from the Uttara Tantra. That's the highest Yoga Tantra. Of all the Yoga Tantras, then this is the highest Yoga Tantra. So what is the danger of taking on a high view that one hasn't oneself understood or realized? Well, the danger is that it can end up having very negative consequences to the way you act or conduct yourself. So if you say everything is purity, there is no good or bad, then a very worldly person with a lot of negative emotions will think that that's an excuse for them to act in any way they like. You know, it's as if we don't have to pay any attention to our conduct. And that's mistaken. And you often hear this on teachings online, on YouTube. In fact, the other day, I was listening to a teaching, and the teacher was saying, well, basically, there is no path to tread, there's no journey, and there's no discipline. Of course, that statement can be taken many different ways. But for some people, then they will take that statement to mean that they don't have to be careful about their conduct, how they act. That if they do something negative, it doesn't matter. Everything is purity. And this is very dangerous. Why is this dangerous? It's dangerous because karma is infallible. If you do something negative, then you have no choice but to either experience the results of that negativity or to purify that. So these are the only two ways to ripen your karma. One is to actually experience it, and the other one is to purify it away. And for some, then they think, well, oh, that's fine then, I'll just purify my negativities. But it's not that easy. I mean, you hear people say, if I do a few Vajrasattva mantras. So in Tibetan Buddhism, we have this Om Binsasatta Hom, Om Binsasatta Hom. So let's say I do one mala of Om Binsasatta, Om Binsasatta, Om Binsasatta. We have this idea that I can completely annihilate all my negativities from the past. Now, in the text, it does say that if you do this mantra, it will cure or remedy all your past negativities. But also, there's some kind of preconditions for that, because this is a kind of tantric practice. It's a Vajrayana practice, right? So the first precept of the Vajrayana is to have pure view, pure vision. And in pure vision, we don't see any negativity. It's not about convincing ourselves that there is no such thing as negativity, or there's no good and bad. It's not about lying to ourselves or deceiving ourselves that we have this belief that everything is equal, because we don't, let's face it. It's about actually having that pure vision as an uncontrived natural view, or personal view. So we would see, for example, excrement on the ground to be nectar. That's the level of view it is. And we don't have that. I mean, let's face it, if somebody presents a contradictory spiritual view, something that contradicts our own beliefs. For example, if I say, well, there's different classes of Tantra, and the first or lowest class of Tantra is the Kriya Tantra, and the highest class of Tantra is the Uttara Tantra, and many people get upset. But that's not me saying that. That's what it says in the ancient Indian and Tibetan texts. There's a classification of the Tantras, depending on outer and inner, and higher and lower. And that's the way it was taught, and there's reasons for this. So it's not like I'm just choosing this to criticize one group over another, or choosing the Uttara Tantra because it happens to be the Tantra of the Mahamudra, the practice that we do in the Kagyu lineage. It's not like that. So if we have such strong clinging to good and bad for things like philosophical discussion and debate, which are supposed to be very benign things, right? Discussing philosophy in the ancient world was seen to be a very virtuous thing. We see it to be negative. We can't even tolerate somebody contradicting our view. So of course, then we have natural belief in good and bad. If somebody were to steal your car or break into your house, they break into your house, they steal all your stuff and mess it up. Not only that, they leave a big jobby in your bed, right? And you come in, what are you going to think? Everything is purity, there's no good and bad. I really doubt that. It's very unlikely. Never mind somebody stealing your car. Even if somebody bumps into your car and scratches it on the road, then we get angry, right? So these things are actually quite minor. For example, somebody stealing something from your house or leaving a big poo in your bed is quite insignificant compared to losing your life. But look at how dearly we hold our lives to be. Even the thought of being cut or being harmed is something repulsive to us. You can imagine a big industrial meat slicing machine, the sort of thing that they put half a cow into to slice it up. Now, would you be able to place your arm into that machine? Even the thought of that is repulsive to us. So of course, we have a belief in good and bad. And what we tend to do is we hear this high view, there is no good and bad, and then we try to get out of it what we want. For example, that means I can behave however I like. Also, I can get angry with somebody else if they behave in a way that I don't like. But these things are totally self-contradictory, right? This view of equality is a level of a view of a very high spiritual practitioner. It's not even an ordinary being. This is a noble being. To have the view of equality, you have to be liberated from samsara. This only arises for people who have been liberated from samsara. So we hear this teaching that everyone is Buddha, everybody is Buddha. And we take that in a way that's kind of useful to us. That means that I am equal to others. For example, I am equal to the Buddha. We use it to elevate our own status. Now the question is that our natural view? If everyone is Buddha, then logically, there's nothing to do, right? If everyone is Buddha, then enlightenment is spontaneous. So there's no work on the path, there's no individual who needs to practice, and there's no practice to do, right? This is what we call the freedom from the three wheels. Now, this is not our view. We very much have a view of a doer who is doing an act, something that's being done. For example, I can cut a potato. This is our natural view, but we tell ourselves that we have realized the view of non-duality. The view of non-duality is a view where there is no actor and there is no action and there is no thing to be acted upon. So what do? We hear this view that everyone is Buddha, and we use it in a way to support our own worldview. We only use this or interpret this selectively in a way that it supports our current worldview. We don't use it to elevate ourselves. And the purpose of teaching these views is so that we elevate ourselves. The teachings on the Buddha nature are a way of introducing people to the idea that essentially, in their heart, they are a Buddha. But the purpose of this teaching is not to encourage you to be lazy, to do nothing. It's quite the opposite. By recognizing we have this seed of enlightenment, which is called the Buddha nature, then we have a goal that we can work towards. We have an avenue to progress. And not only that, we develop a belief in ourselves, a kind of courage to be able to carry on, because the spiritual path is difficult and is fraught with hardship. And so by introducing people to the idea that there is this Buddha nature, that in essence all beings are Buddha, then there are two things. We ourselves do not become discouraged on the path when we face hardships, but also we don't look down upon others. Even if somebody has been our enemy and has done terrible things to us, then by recognizing they have the Buddha nature, then that kind of quells the fire of our anger towards them, our resentment. It minimizes our resentment and our anger towards our enemy. But here's the thing. For us, all beings are not equal. And not only that, we don't believe that everyone is a Buddha. It is taught in the scriptures that all beings have Buddha nature. If that is the case, then does it mean that someone who's a fentanyl addict, who's living in the streets of San Diego, who hasn't got somewhere to live, who can only get by through inflicting suffering upon others, that that individual does not need to progress or develop themselves? Of course not. They do need to develop themselves. They need to be introduced to the fact that they possess this pure essence, which is called the Buddha nature. And this Buddha nature is non-referential compassion, free of all elaborations. That's how it's defined. So for them, it gives them some encouragement and also allows them to see that there is some way for them to overcome their hardships. It's not been taught to deceive them into believing they're fine as they are. It's taught to give them some encouragement to progress on the path and achieve their potential. And also, when we walk down the street and we see a homeless person who's obviously a drug addict, then we don't look down on them. We're taught to see their pure essence, and in that way, encouraged to help this individual. For us, we have very strong prejudice. I mean, there was a very good analogy I once heard. And if, for example, if I have something, let's say this camera, and I break it myself, well, that's quite difficult, right? I drop my camera and I break it myself, and then I will get upset because I think, oh, that cost a lot of money. I shouldn't have done that. Now compare that to how we react if somebody else breaks your camera. So if somebody else were to knock over my camera, then that would make me very angry, much more angry than I would be with myself. I'm more willing to accept having done that myself than somebody else through their careless acts to have broken something of mine. And that's because we have this very strong identification with me and mine. And also, we value some things more than others, and we're neutral towards some things. So to go around saying everything is equal, everyone is Buddha, is kind of self-deceptive. So is it necessarily dangerous? No, not necessarily, but in many cases, this is a very dangerous attitude to have. For whom? For the sincere spiritual practitioner. If you misinterpret the meaning of, I am already Buddha, to be that you can be lazy and you don't have to apply yourself, you don't have to study, then that's a mistake. That's only going to be an obstacle on your path. Also, this is dangerous for people who are negligent towards their conduct. So if you're taught everything is pure, you're already Buddha, well, a Buddha doesn't do anything wrong, right? So then you cheat on your girlfriend, or you lie, and you do these sort of things, thinking that it's okay because everything is perfectly pure. Well, you're just deceiving yourself. You're kidding yourself on, and not only that, as I said, then karma is infallible. Karma will never let you down. If you act in a negative way, then you will have to reap the results of that, or you'll have to purify it. But the purification of that karma is not simple. That takes an incredible amount of diligence and quite a high level of practice as well. So also that doesn't help yourself to kid yourself on, for example, that all I have to do is a few mantras and then I've purified that karma. That's the same kind of category here. That's thinking we have a very high level of practice when we have a very low level of practice. And thinking we have a high level view when our view is actually quite low is likewise a mistake. And then why do we fall into these mistakes? And that's because we're very susceptible to trite belief. So as I said before, this trite belief is merely to adopt these ideas and concepts that we've heard many times before. For example, if we're in a spiritual community and the teacher is saying there's no self, and the person on your left is saying there's no self, the person on your right is saying there's no self, everybody's saying there's no self, then we can adopt that belief without ourselves having understood or realized what that means. This kind of mistaken belief in no self is probably one of the most dangerous things you can do. Also, a mistaken belief in emptiness is extremely dangerous, and usually ends up with people doing very strange and very negative things, like, trying to poison people or trying to kill people, etc. This is not an exaggeration. This happens. People in spiritual communities commit mass suicide, etc. And they do this because they believe they have a very high spiritual view when their view is low as the dirt. So famously, Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, had said that your view should be high as the sky, but your conduct as fine as flour. And what does this conduct as fine as flour means? It means you pay great attention to everything you do. You're very, very careful with your actions. And so if we believe what Guru Rinpoche had said, then an awakened being who has an extremely high view isn't careless about their acts. Some of the stories I hear about non-dual teachers, for example, they'll go out and get drunk and start womanizing, and when somebody pulls them up on it, they say, well, I've gone beyond duality, so it's okay. This is a huge danger. And if you don't believe in karma, cause, and effect, that doesn't matter, because it's still going to have repercussions. Somebody's going to eventually take you to court, or you're going to end up in jail. So the question is, how do we come to an authentic understanding of these views? For example, every sentient being has the essence of Buddha, is what it says. That's not mistaken. The problem is we don't understand what that means. And as I said before, this is the view of the Uttara Tantra, the highest Yoga Tantra. So you can study these texts. They still exist. And there are English translations. And in my own case, then we spent around 2 years studying this text. More than 500 hours, plus revision and exams, etc. I can tell you it's not an easy point of view. So what we tend to do, as we hear everyone is Buddha, we go, oh really? Everyone's Buddha? Okay, fine. We oversimplify the Dharma. We take it to be something very commonplace and easy, but it's not easy at all, because there are all these contradictions, right? If everyone is Buddha, then the drug addict in the street doesn't need to improve themselves, right? If everyone is Buddha, then you don't need to get angry if somebody scratches your car, right? Because it was the Buddha that scratched your car. If somebody cheats you, robs you, lies to you, then none of those things matter, right? Because everyone is Buddha. Well, that's not our view. So we clearly don't understand what that means. Not only that, then for hundreds and hundreds of years, scholars have been debating the inner meaning of such statements, and they don't agree. And these aren't foolish people, They're not just sort of old men who lock themselves up in monasteries and engage in conceptual fallacies. These are scholars. I mean, our own teacher in Sekar is a Geshe who studied in southern India for 21 years. And he has the most excellent character. He's very venerable. He has huge amounts of compassion, way more than I have. And he's incredibly learned. He's the most learned person in the retreat center. He's not a fool. And so for hundreds of years, they've been debating the meaning of these words. Everybody is Buddha. And they don't all agree. And why is that? It's because it's not a simple point. It doesn't mean that we are all equal in every way. Equality is an important thing, right? Gender equality is an important thing, but that's just a worldly way of thinking about things. If we are equal to a Buddha, that means that we have all the qualities that a Buddha has. And it also means that we've purified all our negativities. There's a difference between having the seed of Buddha and being a Buddha. And what is called a Buddha is one who has purified all negativities and increased all positive qualities. That's the definition of the word Sangha I've said before. And so to take the meaning of everyone is a Buddha to mean that I am equal to a Buddha is mere self-deception. And it won't serve you in any way. Because if you're a Buddha, you don't need to progress. You don't need to do anything. You've got nowhere else to go. You've reached the end goal. We haven't got there. We get angry. People upset us. We're irritable. We have likes and dislikes. Even when it comes to simple things like food. Some people prefer pizza. Some people prefer Chinese food. We all have these. And this is a clear sign that we haven't realized the view of non-duality and equality. Now, for some people, it doesn't really make any difference if they convince themselves that they have a very high view, as long as that doesn't reflect in their conduct. But for many people, this is incredibly dangerous. And the question is, well, how do you come to understand what these things mean? Well, there's 3 stages. First, you have to study. Through study, you gain a conceptual understanding of an idea. For example, emptiness. We've all heard about emptiness, right? So most people hear everything is empty, and then what arises to their mind is nothingness. It means nothing exists. Also, actions don't matter. That's not the meaning of emptiness. That's a completely mistaken understanding of emptiness. And how you get to a true understanding of emptiness, a valid conceptual understanding of emptiness, is you've got to study. You've got to look into who said what, in what circumstance, under what conditions, right? If emptiness means non-existent, which most people seem to think it does, then that means good and bad don't exist. This life doesn't exist. Consciousness has no qualities, etc. One has to ask, well, if nothing exists, then where did everything come from? Where do appearances arise from, if nothing exists? And this is something that even a small child can identify. You know, it's a conceptual paradox. So you have to overcome these paradoxes. You have to study enough so that you no longer have these contradictions. You try to meditate on emptiness, but you have inner contradictions in your understanding. And when you sit down and meditate, what will happen is you'll get stuck. You'll come up to a wall because your belief and reality are not in harmony. And not only that, your belief contains inner contradictions. And so people get stuck in loops. And they spend all their life, 20, 30 years meditating and not getting anywhere because they're stuck in this loop. And this loop is like a feedback loop. If you do computer programming, if you make this mistake and the way you program something, then the computer just spins, right? You get this little spinning disc. And this is what happens in our meditation. So the first stage is associated with study, and that includes listening to your teacher, looking at texts and books, reading sutras, etc., to gain a deeper understanding of this very profound topic. So first, don't oversimplify any of these things. They're not simple. If they were simple, then it'd be easy for a child to understand, right? It's not like that. And then next, you have to take that understanding, and the second stage is contemplate on that. And you need to contemplate on that until you come to experiences of how that is real, how that is true or really arises to mind, especially in meditation. So in the analogy of emptiness, then we study the meaning of emptiness. We study that until we resolve these conceptual fallacies. We resolve these inner contradictions. And then once we have certainty in the truth of emptiness, then we can contemplate on that. And contemplation means that we develop personal experience of the meaning of that. And not only that, then appearances of that truth will arise to mind from time to time. That's what's called experience. So you're sitting in meditation, you're looking at a thought or something, and suddenly you have a direct perception of the empty nature of that thought. And you go, oh, that's what it is. So there's this moment of recognition that there's this experience that is valid. It's valid because it's irrefutable, right? There's no contradictions in your understanding. And then based on accumulating many experiences, eventually that experience becomes continuous and unchanging. And once it has become continuous and unchanging, that's what we call realization. So somebody has realization of emptiness, then everything, under all circumstances, always appears as empty. In all cases, there is no grasping to the reality of anything ever. So in accordance with that, then there's also no suffering, right? Because if you don't experience suffering as real, then you won't suffer from it physically or mentally. This is a very important point. So in terms of the teaching that everyone is Buddha, what does that mean? Well, first you have to understand Buddha nature. And to do that, basically, you have to go to this highest continuum, Uttara Tantra, this high Yoga Tantra teachings. And as I said, in our case, then we spent nearly 2 years studying this, and then also discussing it with a teacher, helping with analogies and through his own experience, sometimes looking at other texts. And you do that until you have a firm grasp of what is being talked about. Clearly, everybody is Buddha doesn't mean that somebody whose life is completely upside down, who's suffering greatly, doesn't need to change anything. It doesn't mean that, right? So it must mean something else. So you come to resolve these inner conflicts and these contradictions, and then at some point, you have a very clear understanding of what it means. And having that clear understanding, and then you can contemplate on it. Then it becomes something that you can hold in your mind, right? As long as you have doubts and you're lacking understanding about something, like Buddha nature or emptiness, then it's not possible to contemplate on it. You can't fix it in your mind. Because when you try to fix it in your mind, then you run up to these contradictions. So you go around in circles. And after contemplating on that successfully, you've got these brief moments of lucidity where something that arises to your experience appears in accordance with that principle. And that principle here would be Buddha nature. And then eventually, when you realize Buddha nature, which is what we call kensho in the Zen tradition, then you're basically liberated from samsara. Because there, then you perceive all beings to be Buddha. So when you get to this state of realizing the truth of Buddha nature, that all beings are Buddha, then you only perceive Buddhas. You don't perceive a homeless person in need in the street who's suffering greatly. You see a Buddha. The person who runs into your car is not a horrible person, they're a Buddha. Once we gain this view, then we have the view of equality and the view of purity. And this view of purity is the view of the Vajrayana. I only say these things because, one, I don't want you to be wasting your time. And why is that? Because I've seen it before. You see people who, year after year, for decades, who dedicate themselves to the spiritual path, and they never get anywhere. They just go around in circles. And more often than not, they become quite difficult and strange people. And the reason why they become difficult and strange people is because they're holding on to this self-deception that they've realized a high view when they don't actually understand what that means. And this leads to one becoming jaded. As I've said in my previous video, this is a real danger for somebody on the spiritual path. To become numb or jaded to the Dharma is a really negative thing. Because what you're doing is you're habituating yourself to be desensitized to the Dharma teachings. And in future lives, then you won't meet them. You won't encounter the Dharma. You won't encounter teachers. So keep an open mind. Listen to the opinions of others. And don't accept things out of trite belief. You must look into things for yourself. And you have to resolve these paradoxes. You have to resolve these conflicts, right? If somebody tells you there's no path, there's no journey, there's no discipline, and if that means to you that you've got nothing to do and you don't have to worry about your conduct, then there's a problem there, right? Don't just apply it to the things you want to apply it to. For example, somebody has something nice and I like it, so I steal it, and that's okay, because everything is equality. You have to apply it the other way around as well. Well, is it okay if they steal from you then? Apply it in all circumstances. You have to resolve these contradictions and paradoxes, because if you don't, you'll never come to this first stage that is understanding. And most of us are at this prior stage, before understanding, and that is merely having heard the words. And what we do is we merely hear the words, everyone is Buddha, and then we go around repeating it to everybody. And we only repeat it to people when it suits us. Like if we're in an argument and we want to contradict somebody, and we say, well, everybody's Buddha, aren't they? It's kind of a throwaway statement. It's cheating, really. So what I'm saying is you need to develop understanding, experience, and realization of these high views before that can be of any use to you personally, in terms of your own progress and your own path. However, that doesn't mean that you can't debate or discuss these views. In fact, the process of debating or discussing philosophical views is part of this category of study. Remember, the study, contemplation, and meditation. Well, this first category of study, which is the means by which we come to understand a view, part of that is this process of debate and discussion. And that's primarily what I encourage on this channel and in the comments. If somebody presents me with a philosophical position, then I will respond to it in a way to try to generate further discourse or deeper understanding. So generally, if somebody kind of repeats a trite statement, and it's clear that they don't understand what they're talking about, or even where this statement came from, or in what context that was said, then I might make a response to that to encourage further investigation. It's a valid process, and it's not based on trying to argue with somebody or put them down. So there's this high view, and the question is, do I really believe this myself? is this my natural uncontrived view? If this is my natural uncontrived view, then in this circumstance, I would act in this way. So if I have the view of equality, then I will never have a differentiation between good and bad, high and low, a Buddha and a sentient being. It's glaringly obvious that we don't have these views because we have very, very petty likes and dislikes. It's fine to say there is no such thing as should and should not, but really when it comes down to it and somebody steals our car, we think he shouldn't have done that, right? I'm losing the light, it's getting dark, and I better leave it there. It was quite interesting this morning because the first snow fell on the high ground and all the mountains have turned white. And it just reminded me of impermanence. Just can't stop time for 1 second. Although I'd like to think that I'm not getting older, then day by day I'm getting older. I'm steadily progressing towards my own demise. And so I have to do something while I can. I have to try to do something positive. And if I'm going to do something positive, then it should be in line with the Dharma. And that's because I've spent a lot of time looking into these things. I've spent many years studying intensely for many hours every day, and also meditating, practicing in different ways. And so if I'm going to be of use or benefit, then this is the way I should be of use and benefit. And however, if there isn't anybody out there who's interested or wants to listen, that's fine. I have other skills. I'm able to do plumbing and electrics and carpentry and that sort of thing. I used to be a yoga teacher. I used to teach music. So if I can't be help or benefit in terms of the Dharma, well, there's other ways. So it's no big deal. And thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.